Well, good morning, church. So glad that you are here with us today and for the past couple weeks. At the end of the month and early into July, my wife and I got to celebrate 20 years of marriage, and so we were gone for a little bit, a couple of Sundays just to get away. I was able to preach at one of my best friends, kind of my prayer partner for the past 20 years. I was able to preach at his church on July 3rd, was fun and a gift. And then last Sunday, Randy Forbes preached here and ministered to me. And I'm excited to be back preaching this morning. It's been 3 weeks since I've preached here, so strap up those seatbelts. I got some time to make up. But what I want to do this morning is I want to start with just kind of a confession to you that there are things that confuse me. And maybe you can relate to some of these things. Here's an example. Who decided what breakfast foods are for breakfast and what dinner foods are for dinner? Like, why can't Texas Roadhouse be open at 8 a.m. so I can have a steak and my loaded mashed potatoes with my bowl of chili and those sweet heavenly rolls? Like, why can't that be breakfast? Like, who got to pick? I don't understand it. All right, let me give you another one. Women's jeans with their faux pockets. Their fake pocket. I love a pocket. The pocket's a good thing. But women's jeans typically have fake pockets. I don't get it. I don't understand it. Probably never will. The other thing I didn't understand was my mom's purse growing up. My mom's purse had everything from Band-Aids and lipstick to snacks and extra shoe and a Rand McNally road map. Like, she had everything in her purse growing up. Didn't understand it. Probably never will. Dust. It just sits there and does nothing, and it gets dirty. It makes no sense to me how that happens. Why can you drink a drink, but you can't food a food? It doesn't make sense to me. There are things that my brain goes, I don't get it. How about this one? Pizza. It's an essential food group. We serve a round pizza pie in a square box and eat it in triangles. I don't get it. I literally don't understand who comes up with this stuff. Text messaging. I'm going to get very simple. I can take my phone and I can type to my wife, "I love you, babe," and send it. And within seconds, it comes to her phone. The same thing. I don't understand. Text messaging boggles my mind, as do airplanes. How a 400,000-pound chunk of metal can just soar through the air. I don't get it. It just boggles my mind. I'm going to give you one more, and I'm going to step onto my soapbox for a second. It's called stray carts. I don't get how people are so arrogant that they can't just take their cart back to the little spot that the store has provided you to put your dang cart back into. It boggles my mind. I don't get it. They've even provided the spot for you. They're all across the parking lot. Just take the extra 15 steps. I actually have a theory on these people. They're narcissists. They think they're better than everybody else, and the rules don't apply to them. Step off my soapbox. Okay, I'm going to give you one more. And I shouldn't admit this as a pastor, but Jesus. Sometimes what Jesus does confounds me, confuses me. I don't get it. It sometimes doesn't make sense. But I've learned over my years of living that just because it doesn't make sense to me doesn't mean it doesn't make sense to Him. And what I want to do this morning as we're talking about this monumental summer, this monumental moment, is I want us to understand that Jesus, everything that Jesus did, everything that Jesus does, and everything that Jesus will do has meaning. And we might not understand the why to the what. Why are we going through what we're going through? But to Jesus, it makes sense. And so if you have your Bibles, I'd love for you to flip open to John chapter 11. John chapter 11, for some, it's probably a really familiar text. For some, if you're newer to church, you might not know it, you might not understand it, but we're going to look at the why to the what. Why does sometimes Jesus do things that just simply on paper don't make sense? Now, while you're turning there, I want to give you the backstory, the context, because context is king. Context matters so much. When we're reading the Bible, we don't just read the Bible to finish. We read the Bible to change, to learn, to grow, to understand. How do we apply this to our lives? Because if all we're doing is reading the Bible for biblical knowledge, but there's no real life application, then we're spiritually arrogant. How do I apply this to my life right now in 2022? We always have to have that framework. So context matters. So if you're really smart, you would know in John chapter 11 that what happened before happened in John chapter 10. Letting you in on a little clue there. The context leading up to 11 happened in 10. And so if you were to read John chapter 10, what you would see is Jesus is doing miracles. Jesus is teaching and helping people, offering hope, and the religious leaders can't handle it. They can't handle that they're losing influence. They can't handle that they're losing followers. They can't handle it. And so they begin to kind of conspire away. How do we get rid of this guy? How do we just get him out of our region? And they try to grab him. He kind of escapes. And he goes back to a region in his mind of familiarity. And I want to just highlight something to you. When you're in doubt about the goodness of God, go back to a place of familiarity. When was the last time God showed up and spoke to you? When you're in doubt about why God's doing what God's doing in your life, go back to a place of familiarity. Jesus did. He went back to the Jordan River outside of Jerusalem. He went back to the place where he was baptized. I don't think it's because he had lost faith in God, but I bet you he was a little discouraged. And so he went back to comfort. And I'm just going to say, if Jesus needed to go back to familiarity and comfort and a place where he knew God showed up, what makes us think that we don't have to sometimes do that? When you're in doubt of the goodness of God and who he is and what he can offer you and how he can minister to you, go back to a place of familiarity. Maybe for you it was your day of baptism. Maybe it was your day of salvation. Maybe it was a quiet time a month ago where you just sensed and felt and heard the presence of God so real, so thick, so prominent. You're like, I know God showed up. Go back to that and start over when you're in doubt of the goodness of God. So Jesus is in this place of comfort. He's near the Jordan River. He's outside Jerusalem. And across the countryside come some people. And they're not just walking. They are frantically hurrying to Jesus. They are high-stepping it. Because one of their best friends is sick. One of their best friends is dying. And they have to get word to Jesus. They have to find Jesus and go to Jesus on behalf of their friend. And I just want to ask you this. Are you that kind of friend? That you bring your needs and the hurts and the worries of your friends to the feet of Jesus. Are you that kind of friend? Do you have friends like that? That bring your hurts and bring your struggles and your burdens. They bring them to Jesus for you. Are you in connection and relationship with people who go to God for you? Do you go to God for them? So in John chapter 11, verse 3, here's what's happening. Their friends are running across the countryside, and the sisters had sent word. The sisters are Mary and Martha. And they sent word to Jesus, and this is what they said. Lord, the one you love is sick. Now, I want you to look at that verse. There's no name. Running across the countryside, and it's about 2 miles, and we'll get to that in a minute. All they do is they say, Jesus, the one you love is sick. Now, I want to stop here because to Jesus, aren't there a lot of people that he loves? He would love his mom, Mary. He would love his dad, Joseph. I'm sure he had a love-hate relationship with James and his other brothers, but he loved them. He loved his disciples. He loved everybody. So the fact that these friends don't give a name tells me something. That you're more than a name to Jesus. You're the one he loves. I'm the one he loves. You might just be a name to somebody, a number to somebody, a nobody to somebody. You might be somebody that they take advantage of, but to Jesus, you are the one that he loves. Think about that for a second. You're more than a name. You're the one. Just soak that in just for a second. I'm the one that Jesus loves. You're the one that he loves. There's no name given. And in John chapter 11, verse 4, with no name given to him, this is what Jesus says. Lazarus' sickness, he doesn't know who it is on paper, but he knows. You might feel unseen. Jesus sees you. You might feel uncared for. Jesus cares for you. You might feel unheard. Jesus hears you because you're the one he loves. They don't even have to give the name. And Jesus says, Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it happened for the glory of God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this. They didn't say his name, but Jesus knew his name. Now, I admitted at the very beginning that there are times where Jesus doesn't make sense to me. This is one of those narratives that on paper don't make sense to me. Let me help you understand a little bit. So although Jesus loved Mary and Martha, and he loved Lazarus, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. Finally, he said to his disciples, now we can go. Let's go back to Judea. Because just stop. Isn't everything with Jesus supposed to be tied up in a nice little neat bow? And when he delivers it to us, we open it up like that Rand McNally road map in Mom's purse, and it's mapped out just perfectly for us to follow. No, it's not. He says, I love him. I know his name. His name's Lazarus, but we're not going to him. That doesn't sound like love to me. That doesn't sound like, hey, you're hurting. I'm going to ignore you. You're dying. Good luck on your own. I'm not going to come to you. I could probably fix this, but I'm not going to. I'm going to keep you feeling lonely. I'm going to keep you feeling worried. I'm going to keep you feeling scared. And if you've grown up in church or you know the narrative, I'm going to give you the spoiler alert, he dies. And we know that, and we also know, spoiler alert again, that Jesus raises them back to life. But they didn't. They were living the story just like you're living yours right now. See, you don't know the outcome to the situation that you're going through. It's not a Rand McNally roadmap where you unfold it. You can never put those away the same way, by the way. We know that, right? You try to fold those up and then it just ends up in a ball in the corner. That's why we have Apple and Google Maps. Fantastic. But don't you just wish you could undo that map and everything was laid out just perfectly for you? It's not. Now, you'll look back and go, oh, that makes sense. Just like at the end of the story that we're going to get to, it made sense. They were living this in the moment. It didn't make sense. Why Jesus would say, I know him. He's the one I love, but I'm not going to him. This sickness, he told his disciples, this sickness, he told the friends that came, will not end in death. I grew up with a phrase. My parents always taught me this phrase. Maybe you've heard it before. That actions speak louder than words. If you've heard that before, you get the concept of that. Another way to say it is talk is cheap. You can say one thing, but if you don't back it up, if you don't live it, if you don't follow what you're saying, then your actions are speaking louder than your words. See, Jesus, when I read this text, if I take my mind away from scanning ahead and I can try to forget of what happens, and I read just that verse, that text, knowing that he dies, but he said it wouldn't end in death, Jesus' actions are speaking louder than his words. Have you ever said something that you wish you hadn't? Have you ever said something that you're like, I probably shouldn't have said that? Meaning, do your actions line up with your words? When you leave from here in about a half an hour from now and you walk out those doors, do your actions reconcile with who you are in this room? This is hard for us right now, especially in what I would call this politically and kind of racially charged culture we live in. It's really easy to hide behind our keyboard and put people on blast if we don't agree with them. Do your actions and do your words line up? See, Jesus said this sickness won't end in death. And the good news with Jesus is that his actions and his words always line up. It's just not on our timeline. It's on his. There will be times in your life just like in my life, where Jesus will do things that simply don't make sense. But if you trusted Jesus enough to pray, you have to trust Jesus enough to provide. There are things that you're going to go through, and you're like, I've prayed to him, I've called out to him, I've begged him, I've pleaded, I've asked him to step in, I've asked him to help, I've asked him to fix and correct. And if you've trusted him enough to pray to him for that, you have to trust him enough to provide in his timeline. This is a hard one for me, if I can just be completely honest. The waiting for Jesus, not powering through for Dan. But if Dan trusted him enough to pray, that Dan has to trust him enough to provide his answers. So he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. I know I just told you that it wasn't going to end in death. Psych, he's dead. And then he says, for your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there. For now you will really believe. Come, let's go see him. Okay. We know the story if you grew up in church. So pretend you don't know the story. You don't know how it ends. Jesus, you're not making any sense. You said you love him. He wouldn't die. Now he's dead. And basically what I hear you saying is, I'm glad he's dead. I'm glad I wasn't there. Have you ever said something that kind of you wish you hadn't? I remember about 10 years ago, and I didn't ask Eli permission, and so I owe him $1. If I ever use my kids as an illustration, I owe you $1. But when I read that verse, it reminds me of something my son said about 10 years ago. So we lived in the other side of the state about 10 years ago, and a little bit longer than that now. And we rented a kind of a prefab, double wide prefab home from a guy named Scott and his wife Rachel. Fantastic people. We lived on a horse farm. And so they had a dog named Belle that would come down the dirt drive and come to our playground, and Belle would do its business underneath the swings and poop underneath the swings. Every day, 2 or 3 times a day, there's new bombs there, and you got to go pick it up. Well, around that same time, as Eli was younger, my grandma passed away about 10 years ago. And Braylon said, what was Grandma's name? What was your grandma's name, Daddy? And I said, her name was Belle. Without missing a beat, Eli says, good, I'm glad she's dead. Because now she'll stop coming and pooping underneath our swing set. Because he didn't understand that Belle, in Canada, my grandma, is different than the pooping Belle dog that would come and poop underneath our swing set. And he literally said, good, I'm glad she's dead. He didn't mean it, but he said it. Have you ever said something that you wish you hadn't? Like, hey, happy anniversary, honey, I bought you a membership to the gym. Like, you don't say that. Or when your wife says, do these pants make me look fat? And you say, yeah, they really do. You should shred those, never wear them again. You don't say that. I've never said that and never would. But there are people who say things that they wish they hadn't. And I wonder if in the disciples' mind they're going, Jesus, did you really mean that? Did you really mean that you love him, but now he wouldn't die and now he's dead and you're glad that you weren't even there? It doesn't sound like compassion to me. It doesn't sound like hope to me. Now, I'm going to give you, in a second, the hope of the story, the purpose of this narrative, as Jesus said, to reveal God's glory, God's goodness. But there's a verse that often gets overlooked in this text, and it's verse 16. Thomas said to his fellow disciples, let's go with Jesus, and let's go die with him. Because if you remember the context, because context is king, in John chapter 10, they were driven out. They were about to die, and they narrowly escape. That's the plot, right? And Jesus says, now we've got to go back into enemy territory and go see the dead guy. And this is what Thomas says, let's go too. You see, Thomas gets a bad rap, right? Thomas is the doubter. Thomas is the guy who's like, I got to see it to believe it. And he's like the negative Nancy of the disciples. He's the grumpy Gus. I want to be like Thomas, who says, you're gonna go into enemy territory. I'm coming with you because I value the relationship. You're facing a tough time. I am with you to the end. Are you willing to fight for your relationships? Because that's what Thomas is doing. He's fighting for his relationship. Now make it personal. Are you willing to fight for your marriage? Are you willing to fight for your kids? Are you willing to fight for your friendships and your finances? Are you willing to fight for your faith in Jesus when he's doing things that don't make sense? Thomas was. I want to be like Thomas. So off they go. It's a couple miles, take a few hours to get there. And when they arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been in the grave for 4 days. Now, if you're good at math, he's been in there for 4 days. It took him 2 days to go there. How many days did it take for Mary and Martha to get word to Jesus? 2. It took them 2 days to even go to Jesus, which makes me wonder why. Why did they wait so long? I have my speculations. These aren't biblical. These are from Dan. I wonder if Mary and Martha waited because we do the same thing. They didn't want to admit that they needed help. I wonder if they waited because they didn't want to admit that they couldn't handle Lazarus on his own. We can nurse him back to health. We can do this. We don't need help. I wonder if they waited because they didn't want to waste Jesus' time. He's got bigger and better and more important things to do. Why would he even care about what we're going through? This just is so small with all the problems of the world right now. Ever felt that way? I'm not going to take my need to Jesus, my hurt to Jesus, my burden to Jesus, because he's got other bigger things to worry about. Listen, to Jesus, you're the one. That anxiety, that burden, that worry, that fear, that struggle, you're like, it's not worth it to Jesus. Oh, it is. Because you're the one he loves. I wonder maybe if they thought that maybe Jesus couldn't do anything about it anyway. And maybe you've had these thoughts. Well, Jesus probably could, but he won't. After all, I haven't read my Bible lately. Why would he step in and help me? Why would Jesus step in and help? After all, I haven't prayed a lot lately, and I haven't tithed a lot lately. I haven't reined in my gossip lately. I've used some pretty strong potty words lately. Why would he step in and rescue and protect? I've struggled with lust lately. I've been angry a lot lately. All of a sudden, what we do is we make our relationship with Jesus transactional. When Jesus is all about relational, you're the one. We as Americans, Canadian, we're really good at this. If I do, then Jesus will. I mean, I served at VBS all week. Shouldn't I get a little bit of a bone from Jesus in this situation? I give faithfully every week. Shouldn't Jesus help and step in and rescue and redeem? I've come to church for 45 years. Shouldn't Jesus? And all of a sudden, when we have that mentality, we make it transactional. I give to get. I'm guilty of this. 2 years ago, as I watched my dad die, I remember sitting beside his bed with tears in my eye, yelling at God, after 50 years of faithful service to you, this is how you're going to let him go out? Of all the people that you should heal, it should be my dad. I remember making it transactional. God, if you heal him, I'll never, and fill in the blank. Oh, that was me 2 years ago. Trying to make my relationship with God transactional. Just help, just step in, just do something. Why would you do this after all he's done for you? Blaming God, mad at God, disappointed in God, let down. And all the while, my dad was the one that Jesus loved. And all the while, I was the one that Jesus loved. And I find the wording of Mary and I find the wording of Martha very, very interesting. They both said the same thing, just 10 verses apart. Lord, if only. If only you had been here, this wouldn't have happened. If only you would have been here, this This wouldn't have ended this way. See, Bethany was a few miles down the road, and many of the people had come to console Martha and Mary in their loss. And when Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary stayed in the house. Mary was hurt. Mary was bothered. Mary was almost afraid that maybe Jesus could, but probably wouldn't. And they both expressed the exact same phrase apart from each other. Lord, if you had only shown up, if you had only done something. And I'm just going to warn you, if you slide into if onlys, that will lead to transactional relationship with God, not relational. If this is how you view God, if only you would. 2 years ago, that was me for a week. I made my relationship with God transactional. That will lead to transactional relationship with God. And when you think about it, you're the one that he loves. It's all about relationship. It's not transactional to him. It's relational to him. If only you would have been here. Now, I find the words of Mary and Martha very interesting. If only you had been there, Jesus said, I'm glad I wasn't there. Those couldn't be more polar opposites. I needed you to show up. Man, I'm glad I wasn't there. Doesn't make sense to me. I've already confessed. Sometimes Jesus will say things, and sometimes Jesus will do things that don't make sense. The question is, do we trust him? Because if we trust him enough to pray, we have to trust him enough to provide his answers, his timing, his way. Now, Jesus shows up. I'm glad I wasn't there. Roll the stone aside, Jesus told them. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible. And Jesus responded this way, didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believed? Now again, because we know the story, we know what happens. They're living it. They've never seen this before. They don't even know if it's going to happen. Roll the stone away. Why? And I wonder if they were concerned. I wonder if Martha protested, not so much because of the smell, because she would be hit with the flashbacks of the pain and the trauma that she just experienced. And she's already begun 4 days of mourning and 4 days of healing. Now to be stuck face to face again with the hurt. And I'm just going to tell you this. Jesus doesn't roll the stone away to cause her pain. He rolls the stone away to bring new life. And he does the same thing in your life and mine. Jesus will take things that hurt, not to hurt you, but to bring you new life. He will prune away those things and those people sometimes. There's been people in our lives where we've had to draw a clear boundary on relationships because they were doing more harm than good. He will roll that, not to cause pain. He will remove that, but to bring you new life, to bring you new hope, to bring you new passion and new plans and new purpose. See, oftentimes we don't understand why God does what he does, but it was for God's glory. Here's what happens. They rolled the stone aside. No one complained about smell. No one complained about tradition. You don't do that. No one complained. They just waited in anticipation. What's he going to do? Are you bent towards complaining, or are you bent towards the awe of God and what he might do? He took the stone. He looked up to heaven and he said this, Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me. You know that Jesus, God, Holy Spirit always hear you because you're the one he loves. Every time you go to him, he hears you. Didn't want heaven without you because you're the one he loves. Jesus says, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me. But I said it out loud for the sake of the people standing here. Because remember, the crowd, the Jews had come to bring condolences, to grieve with, to mourn with the loss. I said it so they will believe that you sent me. Then he shouted, Lazarus, come out! Lazarus, come on, buddy! And the dead man came out, his hands and his feet bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth, and Jesus told them, unwrap him and let him go. Now, what's not in there is verse 44b, where it said, Lazarus chirped back, "It took you long enough. I've been in here for 4 days." But that's not in there. That's in Dan's version. And many of the people who were with Mary believed in Jesus when they saw this happen. Listen, Jesus will do things that don't make sense in order to save those who don't believe. Are you okay with being the one that might not make sense, but it leads someone to believe in the goodness and the grace and the hope of Jesus? I'll be very candid. It doesn't make sense sometimes why we've moved from church to different church to here, away from family, away from friends. It doesn't make sense, but it's in order to save those who don't believe, and I've got to be okay with that. See, are you okay if Jesus does something in your life, in your marriage, in your home, with your family, that doesn't make sense to you, but it's in order to reach, to save, to help those who don't believe? You see, this is what Kim and I were talking about, this text and this narrative and this message. And she said something that I thought was incredibly wise. My wife said this. She said, Lazarus had to go through the thing that many fear most, death, so that his most meaningful event could happen. Lazarus had to go through something that we all probably fear a little bit. But it was in order to bring new life to somebody. Listen, let me ask you that this way. What if Jesus needs to kill something inside of you before he brings something new to you? Are you okay with that? Well, Dan, what would he have to kill inside of me? Pride. What if Jesus has to kill your pride? That you can do it all and figure it out, and you've got your own Rand McNally roadmap, and there's really no room for Jesus to work his plan because yours is already sketched out. What if he has to kill control in order to bring something new to you or to somebody else? New life, new hope. What if he has to kill your addictions? On the outside, you look fantastic, all dressed up at church, and on the inside, you're a wreck. Addicted. What if he has to kill your anger? You blow your top at everything right now, everybody. You don't get what you want? Oh, they know. And they're sorry they crossed you and didn't, give in to terrorists like yourself. What if God has to kill something inside of you before he brings something new to you? He had to kill Lazarus. There was something inside of Lazarus that had to die before new life could be brought back. We don't know what it was in Lazarus, and we never will until we get to the pearly gates and ask if that's on your top 10 questions to ask. I've got other ones. I'll fill you in on that in a message sometime. Dan's top 10 questions to ask Jesus at the gates. Are you okay with that? Are you willing to let those things die in order for Jesus to bring something new to life inside of you? So here's how I want to close. You're like, well, Dan, how do I do that? I want everybody to put your hands out flat, just for a second. You don't have to stand up, you don't have to do anything weird, just hold your hands out. If you're not on purpose leaving them flat, you know what your hands do when you relax them? What do? They curl back in, because naturally this is what we do. We clench, we hold, we grip, we control. We don't like change. We don't want God to prune away. If I stand, no one stands like this. Hi. No one. And if you do, you're psycho. Like, you don't stand like this. You stand like this. Naturally bent to grip, naturally leaning towards control. This is how we all stand. I'm going to go out in the lobby and I'm going to stand like this, and you're going to look at me like I'm crazy. Listen, if we aren't purposely leaving our hands flat, this is what we do. Every single person in this room, every single person watching online, myself, and this is what we do. If I don't say, God, I need you to kill these things inside of me, and if I'm not careful, you know what I do? I grab them back. It takes intentionality. So I'm going to pray. And if there's something that God's been speaking to you about, I just want you to leave your hands open. I don't want you to relax them and curl them. I literally want you to hold them open. You don't have to do it. I obviously can't make you do it. Some of you guys don't even think you have to do it because you're holier than me, and you probably are, and that's okay. But if we're not careful, this is what we do. You want to know how to let something die inside of you? You hold it open to God and say, it's yours. Bring something new to life in me. So God, in this moment, there's some of us that have our hands held flat, held open, symbolically saying, I need you to kill that, whatever it is, pride, lust, anger, greed, adultery, bitterness, gossip, slander, whatever it is, God, whatever you're dealing with our church, we hold it with open hands. And the tendency is going to be to relax, to get comfortable, and our hands are going to naturally want to grip it back and go back to the familiarity of that. May we let it die so you can bring new life. You can bring new hope, new growth spiritually to us, spiritually to our church. Not just to go through the motions, but to change and grow and become like your son, Jesus. We are the ones you love. And so we give those things that have held us back and ask for new life and new growth. We pray these things in your name. And as a church, we say, amen and amen.